Hello, everyone. Welcome back to another episode of the Unstoppable Dad Project. Now, I've been pretty much MIA for almost a whole month now, and just going to jump on the podcast and kind of talk about what's been going on over the last month and why I felt like I needed to just kind of disappear and not do anything in regards to coaching, podcasting, social media, all of that stuff. As I kind of went through on the last podcast that I did, we went through some pretty big changes in our life. The biggest of that was that we shut down our gym. So that was a decision that we made. Um, Semi-forced, but for the most part, it was something that we were able to kind of take control over, which is why we made the decision on the time frame that we did. And it's something that since that has happened, I've really struggled with. So I really wanted to kind of jump on and talk about what I've been going through over the last month, because to be completely honest and completely transparent with all of this, I didn't know whether I wanted to actually get back on and ever do another podcast on here again. I didn't know whether I wanted to continue to do online coaching. I didn't know kind of where I was going to go with everything. And a lot of that came from my having to change my internal identity, because for the last decade, I've been a gym owner, I've been a coach, I've been somebody who's worked with people in person. And it's a funny time because that is completely gone. Like, I've completely stepped away from doing something that I've done for the last decade. And the biggest thing that I struggled with is mentally changing that internal identity, because when it became apparent to me that that wasn't something that I was going back to anytime soon, it made it very hard for me to continue to do other stuff. And that includes the podcast, that includes putting posts up on Instagram. I've spoken about it before. Like, the social media game is not something that I'm super comfortable with. It's something that I quite struggle with, but I'm working to get better at, because if I want to do well as a coach, as somebody who is helping people remotely, like we offer in this program, and now with Fusion, with our other company, I have to get better at it, because it's the way you get seen and it's the way you get put out there. But for the last month, I've really gone into this state of hiding, and it's all boiled down to, when I've really thought about it, because I've had a lot of time to unpack this really over the last week, it really all boils down to me struggling to change that internal identity. And you hear stories about it a lot, especially in sports, with like professional sports people who struggle when they retire to change that internal identity, because their identity is so wrapped up in them being that sports person. And for me, like over the last month, it's my identity being wrapped up in being that gym owner, in being that in-person coach, and struggling to shift away from that, especially when the option is no longer there for you to do that. So all change is hard. Like, don't get me wrong, there is all change is hard. And one thing that I think I've come to the realization of, the hardest change, when we are presented with some level of change, the hardest change that you will ever have to go through is having to change a long-term internal identity. And so it's hard even with a short-term internal identity, but the longer you have been doing something for, and the longer you identify that you are something, the harder it is to shift away from that. You know, that 10 years of being a gym owner, that 10 years of being an in-person coach, it is a hard thing for me to try and shift away from, because I've been doing it for so long. And not only have I been doing it for so long, but I personally have identified as that for so long. That has been me. That has been Matt in essence. And even though there are other things that I identify with, more specifically, like I identify as a dad and a husband, and I try and do the best I can for that. And now being able to identify as those other things has probably helped me a lot mentally over this last month or so, because it means that it's not just my sole internal identity, right? So the biggest change that I think we all will ever go through is when we have to reinvent ourselves. And it's got me thinking a lot about change in general, just people changing, whether it be changing habits, trying to implement a workout regime or whatever change you're going through, a lot of times when I see people struggle with it and when I've struggled with it, it is really that change of that internal identity that we struggle with. And it's battling the feelings that come up with that change in identity. Like some of the feelings that I've been dealing with over the last month, feeling of failure is a big one, like that I've let people down. And yes, I need to worry about myself, but given what we do, like, and what I've done for the last 10 years, it's about other people. It's not about me. And that was where that feeling of failure, feeling like I let everybody else down, was probably the first thing that I had to work through, like getting to the other side of that, getting to the point to and understanding that I haven't necessarily let people down. I haven't let myself down. I haven't let my family down. This is just a transition that, and almost a natural transition in today's day and age, where we are now moving into a different phase of life. We are moving into something that in the long term, even though this is a short-term pain for us, will hopefully put us as a family and me as an individual in a better position, and in a position where I am able to help more people. So letting go of that feeling of letting everybody down was a hard thing. It was a hard thing when you're in a profession and in an industry where it's your sole job is to help people. And that also ties into, I guess, the feeling of self-worth that I had. So feeling like maybe I don't have anything to offer to people, feeling like I can't help people anymore because that internal identity has changed and has to shift. Whereas the fact is, I can, using what I've learned over the last 10 years, I am still able to help people. So tying back into everything and in change in general, when a big change has to happen, looking at what have I learned from my previous identity that I can then utilize in this new phase of life, acknowledging that if you've been doing it for long enough, you are going to have a lot of successes in that. For us, for me, we did it for 10 years. We did it for a decade. And to run a gym for a decade, especially over the last couple of years, there are a lot of successes that we have had throughout there. Now, are there failures that I need to learn from along the way? Yes, absolutely. And diving into and looking at those failures and trying to learn from them has been a very, very tough thing, but it's also been a necessary thing, right? But I didn't do that until, say, this week, because there was other things that I needed to unpack, and really diving into those failures to start off with would have been something that potentially would have broken me to a point where, rather than it being a month off, it might have turned into 6 months off or 12 months off, or never even really coming back to this, coming back to coaching, which is something that I'm passionate about, coming back to helping people becoming fitter and stronger and a better version of themselves, or the version of themselves that they'd like to step into. It would potentially force me to never actually come back to that. And that is something that, by looking at the things that I maybe didn't do as well as I could have, it's going to enable me to become a better coach. So, but in saying that, simply focusing on the failures and the downfalls and maybe the negative reasons why a change has to happen, or you made the decision to change, is cutting yourself short of the successes that have gone into that previous life. Because if you have done it for long enough, and I do believe that, and this is maybe just the headspace that I'm in at the moment. Again, all change is hard. That whole, everybody, whether you're changing a profession, whether you are changing a life circumstances, this podcast is called the Unstoppable Dad Project. I work with predominantly dads and parents. Like, the biggest change of identity that most people will go through is when they step into being a parent, because then it stops becoming about you and it becomes about this other little person in your life that is solely dependent on you. And that is probably one of the biggest internal identity shifts that we all have to make. And whenever an internal identity shift has to be made, whether it is that change in profession, whether it is becoming a parent, whether it is maybe stepping into a healthier version of yourself, or maybe whatever the case might be, there is the byproduct where the wheels can completely fall off. And the wheels have fallen off for me over the last 4 weeks. Like, yes, I got quite sick at a point. I probably, looking back on it in retrospect, now that I'm feeling a little bit better, potentially believe that that was my body's way of making me stop, because I tried to jump into everything straight away after we closed the gym. Like, I wanted to just jump in straight away and keep moving. And my body has, even though, yes, the other people in my house were sick, my body kind of just went, all right, that's it, Matt. You've got to stop now. You need to rest. You need to unwind, and you need to really unpack this. And, as much as being sick sucked, I wasn't able to train. I wasn't able to do a lot of the things I wanted to do. It was probably necessary for me to kind of get to this point where I'm at now, sitting on this podcast, talking to you about the last month and mentally what I've had to go through in order to deal with this change. But I think when you go through a change in identity, if you don't take enough time to unpack what is going on, you are going to feel like a hamster on a wheel where you just can't get off. You're going to constantly be revisiting these feelings of potentially feeling like you've failed, you've let people down, feeling like your self-worth isn't there, like you're really worth nothing. You don't have anything to offer to the world. And for me, I needed to retract. I needed to not put myself out there for a little while, just because I needed to deal with stuff rather than having to deal with external things. And even though we shouldn't let things externally affect us, they do. They do. We still have to have the mental energy to deal with that. And when you're dealing with your own stuff, it's hard to deal with external circumstances as well. So that's where I've kind of been for the last month. I guess I've been hiding. I've been not wanting to do a lot of stuff on social media, podcasting, things like that. And not only that, I haven't felt creative about it. I haven't felt like any topic that I would bring up would be anything other than me just kind of complaining about what was going on and offering some value to the people that are listening. But the big thing that I've been dealing with, and I guess what I identified is the problem, because it seemed like when this happened, there was a whole bunch of other problems that were going on as well too. And there were, but they were minor. The biggest thing that I had to deal with this was that change of internal identity. The fact that something that I had strongly wrapped myself up in for the last decade, that I seen myself as, that everyone else in my life had seen me as, was now gone. And I had to change, and I had to shift, and I'm shifting directions into something else. And even though that direction for a lot of people outside of myself may not seem like it's that different, going from an in-person coach to, say, an online coach or a hybrid coach, for me, it was massive. The internal shift that needed to happen in order for me to jettison that old identity and step into this new role and this new direction in life was huge. And that's going to be the same for everything, whether it is you're struggling with becoming a dad at the moment, whether it is you're struggling with a complete change in profession, potentially losing a job, or, and having to go and do another one. The biggest thing that we as human beings, I believe, that we struggle with whenever we are presented with change is that change in identity. And if you don't deal with that, if you don't prioritize putting yourself first when you need to actually process exactly what is going on, not everyone's going to take a month to do it. Some people may take more. And yes, there are going to be things that you need to do while you deal with it. You're probably going to need to front up to work. You're probably going to need to do something to earn an income for your family, to put a roof over your head, to put food over the table. But that doesn't mean you can't give yourself time outside of the things that have to be done to deal with it. And it might mean that other stuff needs to go on the back burner. Maybe training needs to go on the back burner. Maybe that side project that you're trying to work on needs to just get pushed to the side for a month, because you've got time. And this is the thing that I realized, like, it didn't have to be done right now. the online project, the podcast, the things that I want to work on and I want to build in the future. It didn't have to be done right now, because by putting those things off, I was able to deal with what I needed to deal with, which in turn will help make me a better person to then dive into those things that I want to dive into. So take care of yourself. If you're going through a big change and you just want to talk, one thing that I did a lot is I talked to friends. Okay. Like that really helped me. It also helped me with, those feelings of self-worth. It helped me to identify some of the successes that I'd had over the last 10 years. Like, talk to someone, reach out to friends. They're always going, your friends are always going to want to talk to you, regardless of what you feel about that. If you need help, you can always reach out here. Look, I'm not a psychologist. This is not mental advice help. This is just an insight into what I've been through over the last month. And I know it's something that a lot of people go through. I've seen it secondhand through the gym, through people that I've coached. As I said earlier in the podcast, you hear about it a lot. Professional sports people, and that can lead them down a very, very dark path. So deal with what you need to deal with. Take your time to do it. Work through it. Because by doing that, it will enable you to step into the next phase of your life more effectively, more efficiently. And hopefully for me, it'll allow me to present you with a better product, better information, and a better program to, help you step into a better version of yourself. So thanks for listening. Hope you got something out of it. Looking forward to putting out some more semi-regular podcasts. Hopefully we'll get back to our weekly schedule like I have been prior to this last month, now that we're getting settled into this new role. If you need anything, if you want some help with training, if you want some help with movement, mobility, anything like that, reach out. All the information is in the show notes on the podcast platform. Subscribe on the podcast platforms. As I said, I'll get back to doing regular podcasts, hopefully from here on out. And it is on YouTube. And I'm going to put a video version of this up on the Facebook page as well. So thanks for listening. Take care. Talk to you soon. Bye.